Hey everyone, thanks for joining the stream. This is Josh Justice. This is not test-driven development in React. I forgot to change my title slide, so we'll get a more general one for next time. We are on to a new topic today. We finished the test-driven development in React series, and today we're going to look into something very timely based on events of this week. I'm in a new location today. I'm in a vacation house here. We're out in Louisiana for December, but I checked out the bandwidth and it's hopefully okay. So the events of this week are, there is a NPM package that you've probably never heard of until this week that had a security incident and has introduced a vulnerability into your application. How did this happen? We don't know about this package. This is not something that I actively use, but because of transitive dependencies, this security incident meant that there was code running on your local dev box and maybe in production that was by a malicious third party. Thankfully, this time they were only targeting one very specific company and one specific app. But the next time, or maybe there's some vulnerability out there that's targeting something more broadly now. So that's unfortunate. It was fixed right away and taken down thanks to NPM organization. But it raised a lot of questions. I am excited about the conversations that are starting to happen in the JavaScript community now. I think that people who are much more informed and knowledgeable than me can think through this and think through what's the best we can do from a software standpoint, from a processes standpoint, from a framework standpoint, to give our users and the users of these packages as much security assurance as possible. So I'm really glad folks are thinking through that, and I'm looking forward to see what comes out of it. In the meantime, though, I and all of us have a responsibility to our clients and to our employers to give them the best possible assurance of the security of the software we're building that we can. And so I've been thinking a lot about how to do that. Like, do I feel comfortable going about front-end development the way I always have been? And so that's still an ongoing thought process, still something I'm thinking through. But in the meantime, I wanted to try a little experiment. So as a thought process, say that you or I decide that we cannot abide these thousands of NPM packages in one application anymore. Say that we need something more stable, more secure. If we were to decide that we needed that constraint, what could we do? Would we be limited to manipulating the DOM ourselves and making really low-level web applications or server-rendered web applications? Or is there a way to make applications the way we have been? And you can probably tell from the screen that I'm sharing that I feel like Preact is actually a really good fit. So I've been doing some investigation this week to see, is it possible to make a web application with zero-transitive dependencies, so we're only pulling in the packages that I've personally vetted, and zero build process. So there's no tools written in JavaScript that I'm running on my machine that are going to do the build. Maybe you would do this for production, maybe you wouldn't, but I wanted to see if it was possible, and I've been encouraged in how things have gone. So we're going to take a look at a few libraries that we can use together to make what's a very similar experience to what you're used to. And the core of it is Preact. If you haven't heard of Preact before, it's a web UI framework that has a very similar API to React, and so it's going to feel a lot familiar to what you've done before in React. Preact is very small. It's only 3 kilobytes. You can maybe see that there in the tab, very, very small on the video. So it's significantly smaller than React and certainly more than other front-end libraries, but still very powerful. Incidentally, so Preact actually mentions on their homepage, well, maybe not their homepage, maybe it's their getting started page, that you can use it via a CDN. So rather than kind of doing NPM imports, you can just kind of pull it down directly through a script tag. So zero build step. And they get into that a bit more. This is a pattern I've found in Preact and some of the related libraries that we're going to look at a little bit later, is that they're set up to work well in a zero build step approach. So we're going to try that out and see what we can do. Incidentally, I think React can also work with just a script tag and without a build step, and so that's certainly something that you could try as well. Maybe you could make a live stream or a recording and show me about that. But I figured since we weren't going to have a build step, I was also interested in getting the smallest possible libraries that I could, if that was going to be pulled down manually and not minified or other things like that by my build process. So Preact is only 3 kilobytes, so that's nice and small. And also in the Preact and these related libraries, there seems to be an emphasis on the zero build step approach, and certainly the zero dependency approach. So with that, let's get started. You'll notice I don't have a terminal up this time if you've joined in other streams, and that was very disorienting to me as I was setting this up. It's like, I don't need the terminal? Like, this is crazy. Like, this has been a staple of my JavaScript build experience. for a long time. Interestingly, also, so this is where I'm going to push up the code when we're done. Coding it wrong / Preact 0 build. Note the README here too. This was very baffling to write. Requirements: a web browser. Installation: clone the repo. Build step is literally nothing. And then running is open index.html on a web browser. And by the way, you can serve it off the file system. You don't even need to serve it in like a locally running web server. So that is really crazy. This is going to be a very different experience we have here. So to start out, I just have an index and plain HTML page with just some of the normal stuff. I went ahead and threw in this tag here to make sure it works and scales well on mobile. Just want a real complete experience here. And a meta tag because I noticed that the browser was complaining if I didn't indicate that I was using UTF-8. So if you pull this up, you're going to get a hello world. So that's nice and simple. So from here, let's go and start dropping in Preact. Incidentally, you'll notice I'm using Sublime text today. I figured if I was moving away from JavaScript as much as possible, I might as well try a non-JavaScript editor as well. I used Sublime back in the day, and so it's been fun to pick it back up again and see what it's like. All right, so we want to pull down Preact. We can go from their website here. Let's do it the way they say right now and pull it actually off of a CDN just using a script tag. So we'll pull this in. We'll put it in the body here. And so this is just pulling Preact off of this CDN here. And so this is useful for getting started. I actually used this myself when I had a bug report on the integration of a few of these libraries. I was able to send up an HTML page, and because I was referencing the libraries off of a CDN and just embedding my code directly in a script tag, it was a single file. And so you could download that file, open it in a browser, and try it out. So there's something to be said for the portability of that that's really, really nice. So we'll try this now, Preact coming off of a CDN, and we'll just do it ourselves otherwise going forward. So I'm going to have another script here. Let's call it app.js. So we'll just make one app.js file for our application code, and we'll come over to here. Oops, app.js. Okay, so what are we going to do? And I'm going to, as usual, look over on my cheater monitor here because I'm not working in Preact 0 build apps every day at work. Maybe soon. Who knows? Who knows where things might go? Because we don't have a build step here, our JavaScript isn't being transpiled down. And so in examples that I saw that use strict is a good idea to use ECMAScript 5 strict mode. So we're going to go with that. This is very different. We're also going to pull in our imports, h and render, but instead of out of a file, that's going to come off of window.preact. So when you use Preact off of a CDN here, and we'll see if I've gotten this wrong because I think I was using another CDN before. When we pull this in, I believe it puts Preact on the window object. It is window.preact. And so that's how you can pull it in. And doing it this way it gives you these functions to use directly, as well as being a nice descriptive way of what your dependencies are, since we don't have dependencies coming in the normal way that it's happened in the past. So, okay, we've got Preact there. And so now we're going to do something that's very similar, especially if you've worked at low-level React stuff more often than me. This should look even more familiar to you. We have a render method. We're going to take something, and we're going to pass it to, let's do it this way, something, and pass it to document.body. I'm not sure if you can do that with React, but at least in this example code, it was plopping it directly on the document body. So what are we going to send over to there? So this is where it gets interesting. So Preact advertises and talks about the fact that it uses JSX just like React does. But that JSX, unlike many things, is not supported by the web browser. So that is not an approach we're going to be able to take here in a zero build step. Again, if you're doing a build step, you should definitely still be willing to consider Preact if you want a JSX approach. But trying to go here with this no build involved at all, we're not going to be able to use that. So instead, what we're going to do, let's see if they show it on the page here just so you can see it. I think it's sort of de-emphasized. So I'll just put it, I'll put it in our code here. So instead, we can use the equivalent of react.createElement. React has often advertised the fact that you don't need to use JSX to use it. And so with Preact, the function that's used to render this virtual component elements, or virtual DOM tree might be the right word, is just called h. So that makes it nice and short. So let's say, so you say h to create a new HTML thing or hypertext thing. The first thing we pass is the name of the tag, which in this case is a div. The next thing that we pass is the attributes. So we could say like ID foo if we wanted to give it an ID to see that coming in there. And then the third thing we pass it, actually, looks like any additional arguments we pass it are considered the children. So what children do we want to pass to this div element? Well, we can just say, let's nest a span. So we'll nest a span. And then for the span, we don't need any attributes applied to it, so we can just pass a null there. And we say, hello Preact. Sounds good. So let's see if I've gotten this right. We save. We reload the page. There's an alive reload set up. Oh, and it looks like I've done something wrong, so let's find out. Syntax error, expected expression. I think I have too many commas. This has bitten me in the past. This may actually be a newer feature of a new ECMAScript feature that the browsers don't support. I just like to have trailing commas on everything. Just put a comma at the end of every line is how I prefer. Okay, so now that I took that out, we get hello Preact, and it's being rendered just fine. So, this is more verbose than JSX for sure. This is a little unfamiliar, but it's workable. This is better for sure than accessing elements and modifying them and mutating them directly. So let's give it a chance. There is an alternative we're going to get into that you might be able to see depending on how good your eyesight is looking at my browser tabs. But for now, let's try to kind of play out this approach using the H function directly. What I want to do is build out something a little more robust. I want to actually connect to a web service and download some data to show it. What we're going to use is a web service that's really nice called JSON placeholder. You can go here if you just need some simple non-authenticated JSON data to work with. So we're going to go, I pulled up, to-dos seemed like a nice one. So if you just go to to-dos, you can click on it and it'll send you right there. You can see this JSON data is coming down. And so that's really great. We're also not going to pull in Axios because we want as few dependencies as possible. So we're going to use the browser fetch instead. Another thing as a note here is that I'm not too worried about cross-browser compatibility. If you needed that, I'm sure you could look into polyfills you might need or anything like that. But for right now, I'm just looking into, even just for modern browsers, even for evergreen browsers, can we get the zero build setup working? All right, so let's work this out. I'm going to just update my cheater monitor here. There we go. All right, so we can actually declare components in here as well. We want to import a component from Preact, and so that's going to work a lot like class components in React. No, I don't know about Preact's plans about the latest React stuff with suspense and hooks and anything like that, so you can dig more into Preact-specific stuff if you like. I'm a newbie to this, so we're checking it out. And for me, like, again, I'm coming to the point of, can I even just do simple component classical React style web application here with no build dependencies? So we'll create a class. We're going to just do it in one file here for now because we don't have a build process to concatenate the files together. We're going to call the class to-do list. Maybe in fact we'll call this to-do container. Extends component. And then we're going to have a render method in here, and then in the render function. And then in here what we're going to do, oh, we got four space indentation. That's very different. That is not what I expected. So this will be very interesting here. That itself is also another unique thing about this experience. Okay, so we're going to return something from here. I want a to-do. Oops, I almost wrote a JSX. So I wanted a. Let me make sure I got this right. Yeah, to-do list. How do we pass attributes? Interesting. I'm not sure how we pass attributes, so let's take a look at that with Preact. We're digging in. Let's see here. Let's just give it a try and see what blows up. So we'll say we have a to-do list here. We're going to set up component state. We're going to need to do this in constructor because it seems like, at least in my version of Firefox, it does not have class properties working. So we just call super, and then we say this.state equals. So we have our state object just like React. We're going to say to-dos is an empty array. Actually, before we even do that, let's just do a hard-coded to-dos like make zero build web app. So that'll be our to-do. So in our to-do list here, we're going to pass, I think maybe it's the attributes like this. We're going to say to-dos. That seems right. I think I've done something like that before. So this is, I mean, as you probably recall, this is something that is supported in Firefox now. So, passing to-dos is the to-dos value there. That's just like passing a prop to the component, but we can use shorthand here. oh, there's something about using just JavaScript. It's interesting to get that shorthand. So we're going to pass the to-dos along there. So to-do list is going to be a dumb component, a presentational component that just renders out the contents. So let's create that. To-do list, and this is just going to be a function. We can make it an arrow function. To-dos. And browsers do support arrow functions. And so then what are we going to return here? We just want, oh, we can't do that either. Yeah, see, like I'm just so used to typing in markup. So we want an unordered list with no attributes. And then for the children of it, let's see here. We're going to spread. We do an object spread. That seems right. Let's see if the browser supports object spread. We're going to do here to-dos map to-do. And then for each to-do, we're going to turn it into a list item with no attributes, and then the content is to-do, let's see what it was. What's the name of that attribute? To-do title. Oh, right, I'm not matching that format yet, so let me actually do that. So in my to-dos up here, I'm going to have an object, and it's going to be the title. The title is the only field I need right now, so we're going to do that. So we want the to-do title to show up in here, and let's just say secure things. It's going to be our other to-do. This way we can see two to-dos being rendered here. And so then down in our application, we're rendering things out. We can actually render out to-do container. And notice here that when we are rendering a component rather than an HTML tag, we actually pass the variable in. So it's the to-do list variable that's passed in there, and it's the to-do container variable passed in there. And as always, I might have syntax errors or usage errors here, so let's see. To-dos is not defined. Okay, so that's something where I'm just const to-dos equals this.state. You can destructure the to-dos there. That's great, and now it shows up. So this is kind of cool. Other than this lack of JSX, this is kind of a sort of similar, I mean, this is very, very trivial components, of course, but we have a stateful component and a stateless component that are being put together pretty simply. So next, let's go in and let's load this data off of the web service. So fetch is available in the browser, so we're just going to use it. Use component did mount. And again, I'm not in React every day, so you can remind me if that's the one that's been deprecated or if it's component will mount. But this should be good enough for here. We're going to start out the state, the to-dos in the state, with just an empty array this time. And we're not going to bother with any loading states at this point. We're just going to keep it simple. We're going to fetch. Sorry, over on the cheater monitor here, checking things out. Yeah, so we're going to fetch the URL, HTTPS. Actually, I'll just copy and paste it from over here. We're going to fetch these to-dos. Then if you've used the fetch API, you know you can't just use the response data. You got a response.json, because sometimes the response is not JSON. Not too often, but sometimes. So then, once we have the JSON, we can say, okay, now we have our to-dos, and we can say store, nope, not store, that's something else. This.set state, I'm jumping ahead of myself, to-dos. So this is going to set the to-dos on our component here, where they'll then be passed down to the to-do list and be re-rendered. So very React-ish paradigms here. Reload the page, and notice we've got lots and lots of to-dos coming down from this web service. We're good. All right, cool. So now we were loading data from a real web service. So let's see what we could do next. The next thing that I'd like to do is to, this is totally fine for these trivial items here, but I want to do a vertical slice of what I'd like to have in a real application. And so we're going to use some kind of state management store. Again, it could very well be possible to use Redux like this. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it. But what I have tried is Unistore, which is a store associated with Preact that can be used zero dependency as well. So this is created by Jason Miller, who also created Preact. And so as you might imagine, they work well together. And so we should be able to pop it in and give it a try. Yeah. Notice they have an installation step here. They talk about the UMD build as well. So yeah, let's pull that in. And then as a future step, we'll kind of pull down these dependencies to be local as well. I actually had a little trouble using this specific build here. I think it was because I was not using, I'm not actually sure. So let me just do what I've done on the cheater monitor, and I think that'll be simplest. All right, so we paste this in to get Unistore off of a CDN as well. So now Unistore is available, and we can pull stuff off of it. We can say const create store. Oh, you know what? No, I'm confusing this with another one. I do want the Preact one. The Preact one is going to be helpful. Yeah, Unistore for Preact. So that's good. So we want create store, provider, and connect. This should all sound very familiar. This is made available on window.unistore. As much as that is global state, that's still a nice convenient place to pull it from. I mean, your list of all your NPM modules is sort of global state as well. You just can't accidentally overwrite it quite as easily as you can with the window object. All right, so we want a store. So let's make a store. Create store here. And I haven't dug into all the intricacies of this really. I've just gotten enough working to kind of play around with it here. So when we create a store, we can have a post element that starts out, or it's not posts, I'm thinking about the other example as well. Let's move our to-dos array out into this store here. So now we no longer need it on state. Next, we want to create an actions object. Action is an object. It's actually a function that takes in the store, and then it returns an object back, an object that makes some actions available to us. So we'll create an action called load to-dos. And this is where we're going to move our fetch. So that's going to go in here. So now we don't need this in the component did mount anymore. And actually we're going to be able to combine to-do container and to-do list in just a second, I think. Yeah, so let's do it like this. So we're going to change this into a function instead, or just a variable declared. And we're going to use the connect function to connect our component to the store. Again, very familiar with various kinds of state management approaches for React. So we want to connect it to the to-dos element. We want to pass in the actions object to be made available to it. And then we pass in our function component. So at this point, we just need our render method. So we'll pass this in here. And this will be passed first the props. Yeah, so a function component here. We get the to-dos, and then the load to-dos happening here. Let's see here. Let's see how I've set this up. Actually, no, I do want to keep this separate component. So let's call it like this. Connected to-do container. Let's put this up here like this. All right, so in here, what I want to do is receive to-dos and load to-dos. And then I'm going to render out here each to-do container. And then to-dos and load to-dos are being passed in. And you React experts might have a simpler way to do this, but for me, this is going to allow me to still have the component did mount lifecycle method here, and then I can call, that is not the word props at all. So in component did mount, we can call load to-dos, and then this is going to be in the props as well. And then in the render method, we go to to-do list and we pass the to-dos. So the responsibility of the connected to-do container is to connect us to our Unistore. The to-do container does the logic, and then the to-do list does the rendering. So let's render out the connected to-do container down here instead, and let's reload our app and see if it works. Oh, syntax error. And we can see, actually, when we click into here, we don't need source maps because we just have our code is just directly available. Firefox is not telling us what line we're on though, so let's check that out and see what's up. Oh, there's a little dot. Missing equals and const declaration. Yeah, little syntax errors. T is undefined. Can't access its action property. Okay, so this doesn't. So I've missed something here. So let's see. Store actions. Load posts, load to-dos, connect these actions, to-dos, load to-dos. Let me go back over on the cheater monitor and see what I might have missed here. All right, create store, actions, store, make that available. Let's see if an arrow function helps here. I doubt it will, but just kind of making it identical to what I've done here. Oop. It's action property. Looks like something internal that I've missed. Okay. Yeah. Live demos, man. Oh, let's go to here. All right, so actions, store, post, connected, connecting it or passing that along. We've got the to-dos and the load to-dos. Props, render. Oh, yeah, forgot the provider. You got to have the provider. So down here in the render method, we need to render out the provider. And this works just like provider from other state management systems. We pass in the store here so it's made available. And then as a child object, we pass the connected to-do container. So now the provider is there that's providing the store to any components anywhere down in there, and we should be good to go. Hey, Radari and Keduchev, thank you for saying hello. Line 11, yeah, I'm not sure. I think this missing provider might be the first thing. So thank you for jumping in and trying to help out. Yeah, now we got nothing coming up now. So let's see what's going on here. Maybe I should have scripted this out a little bit more. I have noticed that things can fail a little bit silently at times. Let's kind of drop this off a bit. Let's see if I just do, let's make a hello component here and see if that's going to help us. We'll troubleshoot here and see. So if we have a provider and then a hello component there, will a hello component render out? It will. Okay. So now so let's see what else might be happening here. Component did catch. Okay. I'll give that a try. I haven't used component did catch before. Please jump in on the chat if there's something else you think would be good for me to try. All right. Incidentally, I just noticed that actually the spread operator here worked, and so that was nice that happened. So now I'm gonna actually go into. Oh, we have a visitor. I will go talk to the visitor and be right back. Please pause. We had a delivery. I'll find out what it is later. I wonder who that is. In the action, are you setting the state? Thank you for that question. Yes, in response to the fetch. Yeah, let's do a catch here. Yeah, catch. Just in case something's happening there. This set state is not a function. Yeah, there we go. Keduchev, thank you so much for that. It's the store.setState that we need to be setting now instead of this .setState. Cool. Putting that catch there works out nicely. And we're good to go. Cool. So you asked, shouldn't you return to-dos? So yeah, so it looks like what needs to happen here, the approaches in these actions is that I should be calling setState on the store itself. So in Unistore, it has a similar state and setState API to components themselves. So that feels very similar. You just get a Redux-like ability to pass the store down wherever you need it. So that was the problem there, is that there was no returning needed, but I did need to call store.setState instead of this.setState. Yeah, it is like dispatch in Redux, exactly. All right, cool. All right, so now it's loading up and just fine. So now we have a state management store here, and we've got components that are rendering it out with the separate responsibilities of connecting it to the store, the logic of dispatching something like loading to-dos, and then the actual rendering out of the markup, or the markup-like function calls here. All right, so this is a good point to kind of switch to another bit of a change. Let's try taking in these dependencies locally instead of pulling them down from CDNs, because it would be nice to have those in the same place here. We're not going to build them in or anything like that. We're just going to save them. And pulling these down is just literally as simple as opening up these URLs, copying and pasting the contents. You can put them in a script folder if you wanted to, preact.min.js. That looks very big with this big font size, but it's not very big at all. Unistore. Let's get the next one. Here's Unistore with Preact. That's very small. That's pretty cool. We call it Unistore Preact.min.js. And so now we're just going to change these to be local. So Preact min and then Unistore Preact.min.js. Now when we reload the app, it should come up just fine. Now notice we are getting an error here where on those URLs they were looking for a source map and those files are not there. So that's fine. We can just edit these build files directly. That's cool. Like that's a normal thing that JavaScript developers do, right? Like this is like your everyday experience, right? No, this is very weird. This is very different. But yes, we can just take out those comments about the source maps and then things will load up just fine. Radari says, I believe when you declare functions in ES6, you negate the need to use a constructor. So no constructor or super is needed. Let me see there. There could be something that I have not removed out. Yeah, there's definitely no constructor needed anymore, so I've removed the constructor here. Constructor I needed before when I was setting up I wanted to set up the property, the state property on the component. Usually I'll do that with a class property like state equals whatever to-dos, something like that. I was getting a browser error when I tried that. Let's actually see if the browser errors out when I do that. Bad method definition on line 23. Yeah, so it looks like Firefox, as of this moment in time, does not have class property support, or maybe I'm doing something else wrong. So yeah, so if you wanted to have a state property on your component, then you can't just define it that way. You need to use a constructor with super, and then you can do this.state equals to-dos. So that's what I was doing before there. But of course, when we're using the state management store, that has the state in it, and we don't need to have a component state instead. So in case I didn't say it a second ago, so we now have our dependencies locally, and so we're loading them in a very sophisticated way in these separate files with separate script tags. So of course, it's likely in production that you'd want to run some kind of build to combine these files together, but we're just going to kind of go on in this zero build approach and see what happens. All right, so we have an app. It's connecting to a web service. We're using a state store to kind of put things in here, but we still have this syntax that's not it's not the most familiar thing in the world. It would be nice to have something better. And so Jason has actually just recently, I think it was just recently, released something. Let's see here, July 30th. Yeah, he might have announced the full version 10 days ago. Yeah, I think that's when I first heard about it on Twitter. It was great timing. HTM, Hyperscript Tag Markup. It's a JSX alternative using standard tag templates. So this is maybe a bit more sophisticated example that I'm using, but this is something that's going to look a lot like JSX. But it's plain JavaScript with no transpiler necessary. So just as a reminder, if you didn't catch it earlier, you can use Preact with JSX if you're using a build step. You can also use Preact just calling these create element functions, this H function, which you can also do with React as well. It's very uncommon though. And this HTM provides us another option, another way to do templates. And so I'll show you what that looks like in just a moment here. So let's pull it down. Let's see if they give us a, yeah, let's get a build. So I was having trouble. Let's try this. Preact standalone. I'm not 100% sure. I think that's including Preact, and so I don't want to do that duplicatively. So let's keep things the way I've done it so far. Oh, and I don't want that as a module, that's for sure. Maybe that's browser supported as well, but I just haven't done that. We want HTM on here. I literally cannot type HTM without typing HTML. It's just ingrained in me after years and years. Again, incredibly short. This is the entirety of the code. Jason is really, really cool about that, about being able to make super optimized code. So we have this. We need to drop it in here. HTML is giving us this option. So now in here, let's see what it says in here about how to pull HTML in. Okay, we do need to pull in const HTML equals window dot. Wait, is that what I want? No. I want HTML. HTML is the name of the tool. Window.html. Actually, this is going to be like this. So now this gives us the HTML library. We now need to hook it up because this is a general library that isn't specific to Preact. You can use it with React or with other things as well. So to hook it up, what we can do is define a variable called HTML and say htm.bind, and then we pass in the create element function like h that we want to bind it to. So this is what binds the HTML syntax to Preact's rendering function. So with this, we're going to be able to use this HTML tagged template literal function down below. And we can just replace the contents of to-do list. So the way this works is we have, how will we do this? I'm going to put it up at this level here. So let me just kind of put this down for reference. So we use the variable HTML, the kind of function, and then we apply a template literal afterwards, a template string literal afterwards. And if you haven't seen this syntax, I've never written anything directly like this myself, but I've seen this used by library authors. So this is a feature of tag template literals that allows you to pass a string to a function that's going to do the processing for it. And in our case, it's going to process this and turn it into calls to create components and virtual DOM elements. So we'll put it on a new line here. So now we're going to type in something that looks very familiar. We're going to create the UL elements there. This is just inside a string here. And then, let's see, I got to see the example here to make sure I do it right. So then inside of here, when we need a breakout, anytime, as you know, inside a backtick string, anytime you need to break out into some JavaScript to interpret, you use the $ curlies. And so that's what we use here. This is standard ECMAScript. So in here, we can do todos.map. We can get the to-do. And then in here, we can jump back into HTML again. So then for each to-do, we're going to output this HTML-ified content. We're going to have a list item, and then to output the content, again, we're going to use the $ curlies, just like as usual in template literal strings. It's going to be to-do.title. And so this actually looks a lot like JSX. I mean, kind of only the difference is you wouldn't have the $ and you wouldn't have the HTML here, like that would just happen. So in a sense, this is making the boundary between the markup and the JavaScript a bit more explicit. But the most important thing is this is standard JavaScript, and so this can be run directly. So I think this will work. And one thing that you notice here is that you don't have the null. And honestly, the null is maybe the thing that annoys me the most about using a render function directly. Is just that's kind of like, it's not obvious just at a glance what that's doing. It's just a little bit of visual noise. So it's nice to be able to remove that with a library like HTML. So let's see if this works. See if I've gotten it right this time. It reloads and it works. I don't trust myself, so I'm going to add in something here just to make sure that something different is actually happening, and sure enough it is. So we've confirmed here we now have a more JSX-like syntax here that we're using the HTML library. We could do that down here as well with provider and connected to-do container. But I ran into a little bit of an edge case when I was researching this. Let's see if that was in the HTML library. Yeah, there we go. Silent error when used with Unistore. So what I noticed was down in the render function here, I had trouble if I was using the provider, rendering out this way and then rendering out app that way. That was giving me a little bit of trouble. And so what we found is that there's a bug in, I think it's in HTML, where some white space was being rendered out. And the provider was kind of just not expecting multiple children to be in there. So that was causing a problem. So at least until this issue gets resolved, it's better when wiring up your provider to wire it up explicitly this way. And that's not too big a deal, at least for my little trivial app here. This code snippet did remind me of one more thing I can show, though, which is how to use components when using HTML. So let's, so this would be a great place to do that here. Let's make this render function a bit more substantial. You wouldn't usually do that for a container component, but just for the sake of being able to use a component inside of HTML. So let's do return HTML. And so let's say we have a heading that says to-dos. And then down here we want the to-do list. So here, the way using HTM that we want to indicate a dynamic component should be used is we use the $ curlies again to include a variable, and we put in the to-do list variable. This is something where it's okay, well, yeah, this doesn't look like JSX. That's a little bit different, but it fits kind of semantically with what's happening in the HTM library. So in this string, these things are being just treated as static, like static text, static tags. This is coming in dynamically from a variable. To-do list is a variable, which is a function component here. So this shows that that's actually dynamic. So that kind of fits with that. And so we can pass props by saying to-dos equals, and then the prop value is also passed in a curly, a $ curly there, and we can end that there. I think we probably want a wrapping component here. I don't know, maybe Preact can handle that, but it's nice and simple to have a wrapping component. So this is how we use a component inside of HTM. Let's reload it to C, and it comes up just fine. We're good to go. Let's actually see if we can return multiple elements, or if it needs to have a wrapping element. Yeah, it looked like it didn't like that. It looked like it was not actually rendering out both children. Notice it's interesting, we're not getting a warning on that. It's possible there might be a Preact like dev build or something that would do that for us. But this is all about like maximum efficiency. You know, you don't get to 3 kilobytes by putting in a lot of warnings, at least in the 3 kilobyte build. Cool. I think there was one more thing that I had shown. Yeah, actually, I'll show you this just in the issue here. So when you have a component and you're passing in an HTM and it has a body, you know, you're used to having like the same name of the opening and closing tag matching. But here, you're closing something that has a dynamic variable as the opening tag. And so in HTM, the way you would close out a component that has a body is just to pass 2 slashes like this. And that's how it indicates that, like, hey, whatever component you're inside, close out of that and you're done and good to go. We haven't had the need to do that here in our code, but we're good. All right, let's just save and make sure it's still running. And we're good. Our application is working. And let's take a look at the size. Let's see if I can figure it out here. The size using Firefox tools. Reload. No, it's not. Oh, yeah. It's not showing up in the network tools because I'm running locally here. Again, this is something that's very different from my experience. Usually I have to run off of a local development server. But when all you have is HTML and plain JavaScript file, you don't actually need to do that. Another interesting thing about this process is needing to actually know what the browser supports. I wasn't 100% sure that that spread operator was going to work, but it turns out that it did. And I sort of assumed that class properties would work, but they didn't. So that's surprising. You can go to caniuse.com is something that I use for browser APIs a lot. But I think it doesn't include ECMAScript features, but it'll link you over to them. So let's see here. If I search in caniuse.com for object spread, it links me over here. See support for spread operator in ECMAScript 6. And this links me over to another website that is not as memorable in name, but I've seen it before. It's the compat table. So let's see if I can search for it. I see not. Yeah, spread syntax for iterable objects. And look, it's looking pretty green here. Edge has got it. IE 11 doesn't have it. No surprise there. Looking pretty green across the board for things that I'm familiar with. Now let's actually see if this will show us that class properties is not supported. Let's see. Function name, property, number properties. I'm having a little trouble finding class properties here. So yeah, I think I don't know the right name to look them up by. But yeah, so that's something you need to think about when you have a zero build process. Is you no longer have Babel and preset env handling what's going to be transpiled for your browser. You need to see it yourself directly. Also, the fact that we have multiple script files is not great. I might do this for like a trivial hobby throwaway project, but even for like a side project, I would certainly want to combine those and build them together. Yeah, so this is what we've managed to get working. We've got Preact, we've got Unistore, and we've got HTM working together to give us a zero build minimal dependency process. You've seen the zero build all the way through this, but let's talk about zero transitive dependencies. So these files, Preact, Unistore, and HTM, are the entirety of the files that are pulled down. Unlike your huge node modules folder, there is nothing being pulled down except for these files. And I'll just go back to a normal font size. Nope. Zoom. Let me zoom back to a normal font size. Font. reset. Yeah, so you won't be able to read that, but all of Preact does fit on one screen here with this font size. All of HTML is incredibly small, and all of Unistore is pretty small as well. And so this is very, very simple. So we can have a high degree of confidence here that there are no other dependencies that haven't been vetted. And so as long as these 3 packages are secure and haven't had a security compromise, we're good to go. They also aren't, tens and hundreds of kilobytes of data. And so, I can't read this minified code, but I can have much more assurance that there's something crazy is not being happening because I can review that at a glance, or I can trust that Jason or other Preact core team members have reviewed that to make sure that it's secure. So this is a way, in a worst case scenario, if you are in an incredibly high security circumstance where you're like, I need to know for sure that none of my packages, none of the dependencies I have been compromised, this has taken us down from potentially thousands of dependencies and thousands of packages, as Create React app has, down to 3. 3 that we could see exactly and are completely explicit in the code here. So that's a very different approach, and I was very relieved. I like server-rendered web applications. I'm obsessed with Ruby on Rails, as you've probably seen if you've been on the stream before. And so I'm all about doing server-rendered web applications when it makes sense. And I like mobile applications, native applications. But I really loved the possibility of having an in-between, having front-end JavaScript applications. And the idea that I might need to not do that anymore from a security standpoint was really stressing me out. And so I'm really glad to have this as a worst case scenario, even if everything else goes burning and I feel convicted, or we decide as a community that all these packages are not okay, I can feel comfortable ethically saying I have a very high degree of confidence in the security of this setup. And it also has a lot of other possibilities as well. Preact is really well thought of from a small package size standpoint, so that can be really great for international users and people who are on much slower bandwidth connections. There's a very high focus on performance within Preact, as well as sticking closer to web standards. There's an appeal with HTML as opposed to creating a new syntax JSX to be using web standards where we render out to HTML kind of more directly. Kitichev, class props or ES Next, I think. Yep, sounds good. Yeah, it seems like that has not yet made it to the browsers. So this is our zero build minimal dependency setup with Preact, with Unistore, and with HTML. I'm sure there are other possibilities as well. As I mentioned earlier, I'm pretty sure that React can be used also with a build off of a CDN instead of using it pulled down through Node and things like that. And to be clear, I'm not moving away from NPM. I'm still developing in Vue.js day to day. I'm still pretty obsessed with Ember, and React is wonderful as well, and React Native. But I want to think about these things very well. I don't want to just go with the flow and assume because using this many transitive dependencies has been okay and just something that we've all done. It's the water we drink and the air we breathe, that's something that I want to continue to do necessarily. I want to question that assumption. I think it would be great if we minimize the dependencies of our package. So if you are a package maintainer or if you would like to contribute, it could be interesting to look at a package you use and see if you can remove some of the transitive dependencies that aren't necessarily needed. Either runtime dependencies or build time dependencies. Certainly they make our lives easier, and I'm all about the readable code and not reinventing the wheel. But for libraries in particular, it could be, hey, you've built it out, you've got good test coverage. It could be that it's a good time to refactor, to write some functions inline rather than pulling in a library to do them. So it's cool to see these experiments. It's cool to work within new constraints and try it out. So I'm going to push up this code right now. I encourage you to try out Preact for zero build and think about what it could look like to think about your JavaScript code in a different way. Hey, everyone who joined on the stream, thanks for joining in. Thanks for helping me out when I got stuck there. I really appreciate that. Check this out, recorded on my YouTube channel later. And please hit me up on the Reactiflux Discord or on Twitter at Coding It Wrong. I'd love to hear the experiments you're doing with Preact and zero build or minimizing your dependencies. Thanks a lot. Catch you later. And I'm not going to switch back to the slide for testing because that's not us. So we're just going to stop the stream. See ya.